Hi everybody, this is Britt King. Welcome to another Particular Software live webinar. I'm joined by Danny Cohen, Director of Product Development at Particular Software, who will talk about the challenges of building and maintaining message-driven systems and how the Particular Service platform is designed to solve those challenges and others across the entire application lifecycle. Danny, welcome.
Thanks, Britt. Today we'll be talking about the Particular Service platform, which we've released a couple of weeks ago. It's a set of applications and frameworks which we'll discuss during this conversation, wrapping around the existing N-Service Bus framework, which most of you are already acquainted with. If you're not acquainted with N-Service Bus, don't worry, I'll try to address and explain every concept and every term, and if not, please interrupt with questions. Just put them in the chat window and I'll try to answer them as we go along. The agenda for this webinar is focused around the building and development phase. We'll have a subsequent webinar in which we'll discuss production monitoring and other aspects. But let's start with reviewing the platform, an architecture overview of the platform and the applications it contains, the frameworks it contains. We'll review a sample scenario of an online video store. Some of you may already be familiar with that specific scenario. We'll see how that scenario appears, and it can be built much faster and much more productively using the new tools which we're providing with the service platform. We'll have a demo of in which we'll develop that online video store, and afterwards we'll have a set of Q&As. Last but not least, we'll review additional resources you can access on the website and elsewhere regarding guidance, training, support, and licensing, and we'll conclude with a few notes and some what happens next comments. So let's start with the platform. Some of you, most of you, according to the poll, are already familiar with N-Service Bus, our messaging and workflow framework, which has been in production for what, 6-7 years, and it's an extensible messaging and workflow framework supporting various patterns: one-way communication, full duplex, publish, subscribe, and other patterns as well. And you can implement those patterns above various transports, including MSMQ, RabbitMQ, Azure on the cloud, etc., and more. Now, it also contains a long-running and time-bound workflow engine we refer to as the Saga engine, and we'll discuss that quite a bit during this webinar. But looking at the N-Service Bus overall, the N-Service Bus framework basically intends to allow developers to focus on their own core logic and fully abstract the underlying infrastructure. So whatever you're using under the hood, whatever complexity lies in the transport you're using or the various components, we'll try to abstract that from you while allowing you still to extend and customize it as much as possible. So that is the core of the Particular Service platform. Above the N-Service Bus, we provide a Visual Studio extension called Service Matrix that allows you to model and design intuitively distributed systems. Basically, it provides a drag-and-drop design environment that's fully integrated into Visual Studio and allows you to quickly model distributed systems that make communicating your intent, your intention, how the system is intended to act in a much clearer and visual way. Not only that, it also allows you to execute that system and see how it behaves, and even side by side, see what the model you've designed looks like and see how it behaves in runtime, and compare the two, make sure that what you've built actually aligns with what you wanted to build. One of the tools we're providing that works extremely nicely, and we'll review it quite a bit during this webinar is Service Insight, and that's used for advanced debugging and analysis of distributed systems. The idea is to provide you with complete under-the-hood view of your system's behavior in runtime, and visualize and display it as clearly as possible using multiple views that provide very different perspective about the behavior of your system. It can be used in development environment, we'll see that today, and it can also be used in testing and production environment, and there are there are significant benefits to doing that. We'll review that in the subsequent webinar discussing production monitoring. Last but not least is Service Pulse, our production monitoring tool, and that is a production monitoring that specifically addresses the challenges of monitoring distributed systems built on top of N-Service Bus in production. The idea is to keep track of your system's endpoint health and the health of your messages, the proper behavior of all the entities in your distributed system, monitor any processing errors, being able to identify and immediately be notified of any failed messages and send them for reprocessing continuously if necessary, and basically make sure that your specific environment needs are met. And by specific, I mean, how do I customize and basically make sure that the specific requirements that my endpoints need to meet in order to do what they are expected to do, how can I make sure that these requirements are met, that the prerequisites for the proper behavior of my endpoints are met? And that is something we provide with Service Pulse, and that is, and we'll discuss that in more depth in the subsequent production monitoring webinar. So all of these tools are part of the particular service platform, and overall the goals we had in mind when developing the platform were enhancing the reliability, maintainability, and scalability of developing distributed systems. How do we do that? Well, we'll discuss that quite a bit during this webinar, and I'm also including this link to our website, to the service platform page. Please review that if you'd like to go really in depth into how we interpret and how we created the reliability, maintainability, and scalability features of the platform. Please go ahead and read that. It contains a lot of links and interesting information. And now let's take a quick look at the architecture of the platform. Let's start here with the N-Service Bus endpoints. Using N-Service Bus, you'll be developing endpoints, multiple endpoints, as many as you'd like. We've seen quite large numbers of endpoints being used in any specific system. And those endpoints will be sending auditing data about their behavior to various queues. Auditing queue for all of the processed messages, error queues for, well, failed messages, and control queue, which provide details about the internal behavior of those endpoints. All of these messages are collected into a database, into a backend service that manages that database. It's called Service Control. It's part of the system. It's actually the secret sauce behind the system, behind the particular service platform, and it collects all of the information from those various endpoints. And that information serves as the basis for all the operations you'll see here today for monitoring the system, or for gathering information and displaying information about the runtime behavior of the system using Service Insight. And it also plays a significant role in the current and future activities of Service Matrix, while in the modeling and design phases. So keep in mind, while we'll be creating the demo and running the demo, keep in mind what's going on is that the endpoints send information to various queues. That information is gathered into a database, and that serves as the basis for what you'll be seeing here today. And now let's discuss what we're about to do. Some of you may already be acquainted with our online video store. It's a sort of a ubiquitous sample we've been using for quite a while to display the capabilities and benefits of N-Service Bus. And what that online video store does is, well, it's a very common scenario. A customer purchases online video content on a website, and that once he does that, performs that purchase, a purchase order is sent to the back-end sales system. On the back-end sales, we do all sorts of processing or whatever, and just to make things interesting, we'll also allow the buyer to have a remorse period, in which he can decide, well, I'm not that interested in that content, so let's cancel that order. Now, until that buyer's remorse period elapses, the customer can click on cancel the order. So we'll allow the canceling of the order as long as that buyer's remorse period is not over. Once it is over, we'll notify the CRM system, and we'll notify the operations system to start preparing the content and provide a link in which the customer can download the content he has purchased. When the content is ready, we'll send a notification to the customer and also include that in the CRM for future use. So that is in a really short overview of the scenario we'll be creating in a second. And without further ado, let's get to the demo. So let's see, Visual Studio. What I'll do is I'll simply create a new service matrix project solution. Once I installed the service matrix Visual Studio extensions, I'll see this and Service Bus system template here. And let's create a new project, call it Video Store. Let's call it Video Store Canvas. And what Canvas means, I'll show you in a second. Now, what's going on here is that Service Matrix will be creating the template and the initial projects required for the proper behavior of the Service Bus system. And it also allows me, and it also immediately shows me this UI, this blank canvas. We refer to this area as the canvas, which allows me to do one thing for a start, and that is to create a new endpoint. So let's create a new endpoint. Let's call it e-commerce, and that's our website in which we develop the UI the users will use to purchase that online video content. When I click Done, what's going on under the hood, and you can see that in the status bar, is that the endpoint is created. It's created by collecting from the internet. It downloads various NuGet packages and various plugins that it connects to the endpoint. And those plugins, we'll discuss that a bit more in a few minutes, but those plugins are what connects the endpoints to service control. And the endpoints can work without those plugins, but a lot of the magic, which I'll show you in this webinar, is dependent on those plugins. So they were added. Let's make sure they were added here. Yeah. Thank you. So what I have here is the initial content I've created and an e-commerce endpoint. And here you can see the endpoint representation on the canvas. And let's start by having that endpoint send a command. The initial command, let's assign it to a sales service and call it purchase order. And let's organize it a bit. And what I have here is the endpoint I created previously, the e-commerce endpoint, sales service, the component that handles it, the sender, the command itself, and an undeployed component that handles the command. So what I need to do now is deploy this component. Let's deploy it on a backend service, the backend endpoint, and let's call it sales management. Sales management, yeah, and it's a regular and service bus host. It's downloading the various plugins, configuring the endpoint, and we should be done in a second or two. Thank you. Organize it here. So we're sending the command for a purchase order, we're receiving and handling it. Now, when we receive it, let's publish an event. And that event will notify whoever is concerned that the order was accepted. So, event, order accepted. Now, who's interested in finding out, knowing that the order was accepted? Let's add a few subscribers. We talked about a CRM system. So let's create a CRM service. And we talked about a system, set of services that will manage the content and provide me with the download link that I can provide the user. So let's add a content service. Once I do that, two components were created for handling receiving the order accepted. This is a pub sub scenario. And I have the CRM service. Let's deploy this component to a CRM endpoint. Let's call it customer management. Yep. Downloading, configuring the endpoints. There's lots of stuff that's going on under the hood. Lots of stuff that I would have had to do manually if it weren't for Service Matrix. Everything you see, by the way, can be done without Service Matrix. Service Matrix just provides the tooling for doing it a lot faster. So how fast we'll discuss in a few minutes. Okay, so we're in the content service. So let's create a new endpoint and call it content management. Deploy that one too. Thank you. Let's organize it a bit, make it a bit tidier. Okay, the order was accepted by the content, and now let's have it send a command requesting the content. So we'll call it content download request. No typos, yeah. Deploy that. So we'll be handling the content download request. Let's have an operations endpoint that'll handle it. So the operations endpoint, let's assume it'll take that specific content which the customer has purchased, prepare it for downloading, and once that content is ready, it will respond. It will send a response. So let's send a command and call it response. Content download response. This is basically a request response scenario. So let's deploy this let's deploy this response to the content endpoint, content management endpoint. And what we have here, let's organize it a bit better, is order accepted event has been received. We're sending a request to prepare the content. We sent a response that the content is ready. And now let's have this content response handler. Let's have that one publish an event called download is ready. Yep. And that download is ready event will notify whoever is concerned about the content that is now ready. Now, who needs to know about the content that is ready? The CRM. So we can add this, and also the website and the sales service so that we can notify the user. So let's create those two components and deploy them. CRM to customer management. And sales, let's deploy that to, well, sales. Thank you. Now let's organize it a bit so that it'll be a bit tidier. Can move that here as well. Okay. You may notice the highlighting feature, which basically allows me to make sense of the various connections. Things may be quite messy when you start dealing with really large solutions. In this case, we're just talking about what, 5, 6 endpoints and 6 or 7 messages. But when you get to the dozens or, well, hundreds of endpoints, that's also a possibility. It starts to be huge. So getting to understand what's going on is a lot easier by addressing this through highlighting, for example. So now when I want to see what is related to the sales endpoint, I just hover to the sales service. I just hover above the sales service, and I'll see everything related to it being highlighted. If I'd like to see who is consuming and who's sending the download is ready event, I can just hover above it, and I'll see who's sending and who's receiving it. And if I'd like to see the type of the message, I can see that based on the, well, icon. In this case, this is a command. and the dotted line indicates that it's an event. Okay, so we have the initial scenario of purchasing and preparing the content. Now we also wanted to handle a cancellation of the order. Well, cancellation of the order as long as it does not exceed the buyer's remorse period. So let's do that. Let's, from the website, so we'll have a UI to allow the user to select whether he wants to cancel or not. Let's send a command. Let's have that command be associated with a fulfillment service. Yep. And let's call that command cancel order. Here we go. Let's place it here and let's deploy the cancel order handler to a new endpoint, and let's call that fulfillment as well. Hopefully no typos. No, we're good. Deploying, configuring, and thank you very much. Let's place it here. Now the next phase after I receive the cancel order is to send an event notifying that the order has been canceled. So order canceled. Publish event, order canceled. Thank you very much. And it went here, so let's move it back here. Well, I can play with it a bit. Next question, who's handling the cancellation order? Well, it's the same handler that will be accepting the purchase order. It will and waiting for the buyer's remorse period to be over. That same handler will also need to handle the order cancellation if it is received before the buyer's remorse period is over. Where's that handler? Here it is, purchase order handler. So let's have that handler subscribe to an event, and that event, here's the list of events. That event I'm interested in subscribing to is the order canceled, this one, this one. And since I'm basically asking the handler to correlate these two messages, to correlate the purchase order and the order canceled, so I'll be able to know to which order an order canceled refers to compared to the purchase order that was received before, I'll need to convert the purchase order handler, this one, to a saga, to a workflow, because it may be a long-running process. The buyer's remorse period may be a long period. So let's convert it. And the next question is, well, what starts the saga? What initiates the workflow? And what initiates the workflow is the purchase order. I receive a purchase order, and then I start waiting for the buyer's remorse period to be over. And only after it's over, I continue with the other operations. So let's have the purchase order be the initiator. And if it will convert it to a saga, I have this lovely new icon that indicates that it's a saga. And what I've done now, so far, we're more or less done with the canvas. I've defined the flow. I've modeled the behavior of the system, and now I need to put in some business logic and organize it. Over here on the side, on the Solution Explorer window, you can see exactly what I've created, about eight projects, each corresponding to an endpoint, and a lot of code, or a lot of boilerplate code, manual code that Service Matrix created for me, and I'll be configuring that in a second. So let's start configuring the underlying components which Service Matrix created for me. Step number one would be to configure the messages. I'm sending a lot of messages here. Well, it's about 7 messages, and these messages need to contain various properties and data that I'll be using in implementing my business logic. So what I can do is on each and every message, I can click on View Code and basically open the class that is represented, that is the implementation of that specific message. As you can see, it's a plain old class object, and what I'll basically do is add an order ID integer property to each and every one. So let's do it fast. For each and every message, I'll add an order ID that will later allow me to correlate the activities of those classes in runtime, of those messages in runtime, code. Of course, in a real scenario, I'll be adding much more than just an order ID property, as many properties and any types of properties that I'd like, as long as those properties are serializable, so that the message can be serialized. And one more. Thank you. So I added the order IDs to all the messages. Now, aside from the messages, what I would also like to do is add the order ID to one additional very special class, which is the Saga data class. The Saga, as we've discussed, is a workflow engine, and the workflow stores various information regarding the status of the workflow itself and the input and output that it receives. And that information is collected in a purchase order handler Saga data class, which you see before you. And all I have to do is add these two lines to it and any additional properties that I'd like, depending on the kind of information that I'd like to store in the Saga. But these two lines are the important ones. First of all, there's the ID, the order ID, which I use to correlate among the messages, and I'll need to correlate those with the Saga as well. And there's this setting which specifies that this specific property, among any other properties that I'd like to create, name, description, customer ID, etc., this specific property, the order ID property, is unique. There's only one order ID value, and that order ID value identifies the Saga that is being launched. And when a message is received and it opens up and it is mapped to a specific order ID, then that Saga, that workflow, will be called that specific workflow. So what I've just done is laid the groundwork for correlating, for mapping the received messages with the Saga. And how do I do that mapping? I'll go to the Saga object, the purchase order handler, click on Configure Saga, and I'm asked again, which is the Saga starter, and yes, the purchase order is still the Saga starter. And I arrived into a function, a method called configure how to find Saga. And that's exactly what it does. Let me remove these lines that were added as initial sample lines, and let's add these two. So what I'm seeing here is a configure mapping in which the purchase order and the order canceled messages, as they are being received, I'll take the order ID and I'll map that order ID from the message, from the received message, to the order ID of the Saga, so that when I receive a purchase order, it will create a Saga with an ID, a unique ID that is the same as the purchase order ID, and same for the order canceled. And that's how I'll do the mapping between the messages and the Saga. Let's close this. Next phase. Next, I'll go to the handler, and let's see how I can add some business logic to it and start configuring the behavior. Let's remove some of the default code here and see what we've got. We've got two functions here, and these are the handlers, the handle implementation in this case, first for the purchase order and then for the order canceled. And this lies in a purchase order handler class. Let's start by adding some functionality to the handling of the purchase order. Let's see what I've added. First of all, I'll add a write line just so I can see that on the console window. I can see what's going on in the console window. Here, I'm taking the order ID from the message and mapping that to the order ID inside the Saga data. And then I'll be asking for a timeout to be scheduled 10 seconds from now. I can specify any time span I'd like. And after 10 seconds, I'd like a buyer's remorse is over class message, basically, to be sent internally containing the order ID value. Now, I also need to create that class. It's a standard class. Let's add it. Thank you, including the order ID, of course. And we're set here. Now, because I'm requesting a timeout, I also need to inform the class that or make sure that the End-Service Bus framework acknowledges that the purchase order handler also handles timeouts. How do I do that? Using a class, using an interface. I handle timeouts. Which timeout? Buyer's remorse is over. Thank you. Let's implement that. And it adds a timeout method. In this timeout method, I'll just add the basic functionality I need. And let's review what I've just added. After 10 seconds, the buyer's remorse period is over. Class will be launched, and with that, it will call the timeout. The timeout function will be called with the buyer's remorse is over message. And first thing I'll do is mark the saga as complete, meaning no additional changes will be done to the saga. I'll send a message to the endpoints console window, and I'll also create an order accepted event, which I'll publish. And that order accepted event will also include the order ID. So this is what I'll do when the timeout launches. Now, what remains to do in this specific class is to configure what will happen if, before the timeout method is called, I actually receive an order canceled message. And what I'll do is two things. I'll write it to the endpoint console window, and I'll also mark the saga as complete. So basically, I have a sort of a race going on between the this handle implementation of the order canceled and this timeout. Whichever is received first, or whichever is processed first, will close the saga, and once the saga is closed, it will not receive any additional changes, and therefore will not receive either an order canceled or will not accept the timeout. The timeout will actually not be launched if the saga is marked as completed. One additional step before we can click on the launch, and that is going back to the canvas. Oops, close this. Going back to the canvas, what I need to do is also correlate the cancel order command and the order cancel event, and I'll need to do that in the cancel order handler here. So let's view the code. Let's remove this and add my own piece of code, and what I've got here is notification on the console, order canceled along with the order ID, and I'll publish the order canceled event. So what I've just done is I've correlated all the various components and configured the endpoints, and now let's launch it. Now, what's going on now is that the NuGet package manager is downloading the various NuGets required for in this case, the MVC and the endpoints that I created. It'll take about, well, 30 seconds, a minute, depending on the connection. But what's going on under the hood is that about, well, a significant amount of code has been written for me, all the functionality I require in order to have a functional distributed system using, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 endpoints and 7 messages. And just to comment, I could have organized it in various other ways. For example, in this case, I've created 6 endpoints, but I could have created it using a smaller number of endpoints, even store everything in a single endpoint, although I don't think that will be a best practice. So having the right number of endpoints so that you'll be able to organize it and manage it in an easy way is one of the best practices that need to be learned and performed in a way that suits your requirements. Another comment which I'd like to make is that this video store sample is like it's a personal pet of mine, because I was one of the guys who initially were involved in the creation of the original video store sample about, well, a year and a half ago. At that time, we had to actually create all the manually write all the code. It took us a couple of days, and right now, I'm happy to say that it took us, what, 20 minutes? Let's see how it goes. So what I have now is a lot of windows, and let's see what's going on before we activate them. First of all, I have these endpoint windows. Each one of those console windows represents an endpoint. In this case, you can see there's the sales management and customer management, etc., etc. And those endpoints are actually creating the underlying queues inside MSMQ, which is the default transport I'm using. And what I also have is this website, this sample website or skeleton website created for my e-commerce endpoint. This is the representation of the e-commerce website the user will be using in order to perform a purchase. And one of the things we've provided is a test messages skeleton, which checks which messages are being sent, which commands are being sent by the e-commerce endpoint, in this case two commands, purchase order and cancel order, and creates a a skeleton for sending those sample messages. It also identifies that each of those messages has a set of properties. In this case, both have an order ID, but if I would have added a name or description or any other type of property, it would also be visible here. In this case, I only need the order ID. Another window that was opened is a specific window, which is an empty window for Service Insight. What I'm basically seeing here is a flow diagram which will be populated in a second once I start the activity of the endpoint. So let's start by sending a purchase order. Let's enter an order ID number 1, click send, and here you can see that the endpoint notifies me that it received it. Let's see how it looks inside of Service Insight. Service Insight, the message flow basically displays all the messages received by the various endpoints, and it is currently set to refresh itself every second. It's configurable, the auto refresh setting. So what we've just seen is a purchase order that was received. It took about let's zoom in to see it up close. We saw a purchase order received, and it launched. It initiated a saga, in this case a purchase order handler saga. It was sent by the e-commerce endpoint, and it was received by the sales management endpoint. It scheduled a timeout message, a timeout buyer's remorse is over message that was also processed by the saga. In this case, it also completed the saga. And that buyer's remorse is over sent an order accepted event. Published an order accepted event, and that order accepted event was consumed by the customer management endpoint and by the content management endpoint. Afterwards, the order accepted in the content management sent a content download request, received a content download response, and published a download is ready event that was consumed by 2 of the endpoints. So in essence, if I zoom out, what I'm currently seeing here, let's increase the size a bit. What I'm currently seeing here is a runtime view of the system I just created. This is the runtime view. This is how it looks, and this, going back to the canvas, is the design time view. So I'm actually seeing the same thing, the same system, both in how the design is defined in the interaction between the various endpoints and which message is sent by which endpoint. And I can also see how the information flows, how the messages flow. Now, in addition to that, in addition to the message flow, you can also see the message list. This is the list of messages that was sent in this specific session. I'm basically filtering to view only the information that's currently created by this specific Visual Studio session. So I'm actually filtering based on a value. In this search window, you can see that there's a value we refer to as the debug session, and that is unique per debug session in Visual Studio. And I'm seeing only the messages created during this specific debug session. So if I, for example, let's take a look at this order accepted, and I can actually click to view, click on that message that was processed by a Saga to view what's going on under the hood of the Saga, of the workflow. So what I'm seeing here is the following. I have the Saga and its unique identifier. In this case, it's called a purchase order handler, Saga, and it receives a purchase order. Let's activate. Let's show the message data as well. So it receives a purchase order command, and it initiates a Saga. This is the information which we placed into the Saga data. As you can see, there are new, and all the properties here are new. In this case, I set the order ID of the Saga data, and I also requested a timeout for 10 seconds, and that timeout is the buyer's remorse is over. And the timeout was invoked here, updating the Saga and marking it as completed, and also sending the order accepted. So what I'm basically seeing here is the input, the inner behavior and inner workings, inner logic, internal representation of the data of the Saga, and the output, whether it's commands, events, timeouts, etc. So in this Service Insight window, what I'm seeing is the runtime representation of everything that's going on inside my system, both the messages, the endpoints, their interaction, their behavior, and when it comes to a Saga, I can also see how the Saga behaves, how the data is set, what's coming in, what's coming out, and what's going on inside. There are additional other fields I can see. I can see the body of the various messages. I can see performance information, for example, processing time, delivery time, or overall critical time. I can see various properties and etc. and more. I can see the list of endpoints and filter based on the list of endpoints, etc. And search is also included. There are various features, including Service Insight, and I do not believe we'll have enough time to cover this today, but definitely more than we. Definitely, there's a lot of stuff in there. Let's stop the auto refresh, and let's send out another command. Let's see how it behaves when I cancel the order. Going back, let's show the endpoints as well, and let's have a message. Let's have an order ID 2 and send the command. Yep, and let's have a cancel order with an order ID, same order ID 2. And you can see that the order canceled for order ID 2 was received. And if I go back, let's organize it by time sent. And what I've got here is a purchase order. It was received. And then a cancel order, and then an order canceled. But no additional messages were received. And if I highlight the Saga, if I move to the Saga view, I'll be able to see that the Saga was initiated, it received a purchase order, set the messages just as before, the buyer's remorse is over, request timeout was done, and before it was able to call the timeout message for buyer's remorse is over, it actually received an order canceled, which caused it to cancel the order, and the Saga was completed. So no order accepted event was sent, and no additional messages were sent to continue the processing. So what I have here is what I've just shown is the two possible scenarios we've discussed previously. Let's go back to the scenario in which I have either a fully completed purchase process or one that has been canceled before it got to the elapsed period of the buyer's remorse message. Okay, so this this is one way of looking at service matrix as providing a view of a runtime and design time view side by side of how your system behaves. And by the way, the side-by-side feature is something we're definitely recommending. The Service Insight and Service Matrix were actually built with the idea of having them run side by side in a way that allows you to view in two screens in dual screen mode. On one screen you'll have Visual Studio, on the other hand you'll have Service Insight. On one side you see the design time and the design time view and the behavior of your endpoints in runtime, and on the other you have a visual representation of that behavior collected in near real time and representing the actual behavior of a system. Let's have another short view about, well, what happens with exceptions and bugs. So let's see what happens. Let's simulate a couple of bugs and see how N-Service Bus and the particular service platform behaves when it comes to bugs and what it can offer us when it comes to debugging our system. So let's simulate two scenarios. One in which we have an exception that's being raised. And let's add an exception here, a potential exception. Let's say that I'll throw an exception when the order ID number is between 100 and 200. That's one option, and that is an explicit message. However, it may happen that the bug is much more, let's call it, not that conspicuous. For example, let's assume that as a result of some faulty business logic, I am sending the same message twice. In this case, you can see that there's the order accepted message, the order accepted event that is being published, and then a couple of lines later in a separate function probably, as a result, let's assume that it's a result of a developer error, I'm resending the same order accepted event. And I'm basically sending the same message twice. How can I detect that? How can Service Insight, Service Matrix, the particular service platform as a whole, help me detect those two scenarios and handle those two scenarios? Let's see. So let's first of all close a couple of windows and let's start a new session of Service Insight that is launched, the endpoints, and Service Insight. Let's put Service Insight aside, organize the endpoints so we can see what's going on. And thank you very much. The skeleton side is up, and let's see what happens. So let's start with the exception scenario. I'll put in an order number of 101, an order ID number 101. That will basically send a purchase order that will fail. And as it fails, you can see that it is failing what we refer to as FLR, first level retry, and it is handing it over to an SLR, second level retry. Now, what does that mean? It means that the messages that are being sent and, well, they fail processing because an exception is being raised, are being retried. We are trying to reprocess them again and again. Now, why do we do that? Because most of the time, failures to well, in many cases, failures to process messages are something that result as a temporary glitch. And if we try again 5 seconds later, 30 seconds later, it may just be processed successfully. So this is completely configurable, but what I'm showing you here is what happens when I have a failure and it's being processed. It will fail. Once it fails, and it goes through this entire cycle of first level retry with very frequent retries, and then it goes through the second level retry, less frequent retries, about 20-30 seconds apart. It will basically go to the error queue, and over there it will be visible in Service Insight. As you can see, it went to the error queue, and inside Service Insight you can now see the purchase order message that has failed. And if I click here, I'll see the exception with a full stack trace, and they cannot request timeout, and it happened in the handle implementation, etc. Basically, it will allow me to go back to my code. To my code here. Let's stop this for a second. Let's comment that out. And see how I can recuperate from that specific order, from that specific failure. I'll be relaunching the endpoints. Let's organize the endpoints for a second so we can see what's going on. And what I'm going to do is, now that I've fixed my code and redeployed the fixed endpoints, I'm just going to click and do a retry. And let's see, let's open this up so we can see how it's behaving. I'm going to click retry. As soon as I click retry, it's going to start the cooldown period. As you can see, it already succeeded. The purchase order has succeeded, and it's currently in the cooldown period, meaning that in 10 seconds or less, I'll be able to see how this specific function is behaving. So here we go. Yep. And that's how I recuperated from that failure using this visual tool, in which I can see both, basically all the details of the exception, all the stack trace. I was able to locate the place where the exception was, the piece of code, the line of code in which the exception was thrown, fixed that, and retried processing the message. It succeeded, and now I'm good. Let's move on to the second scenario. Now, if you recall, the second scenario was basically a situation where I'm accidentally, as a result of flawed business logic, I'm actually accidentally sending the same message twice. Now, it may happen in various cases. I know it happened to me while preparing for this demo. And let's see how the system behaves in such circumstances. And how can I catch that? So let's send an order ID, and that order ID needs to be in the range of 200 to 300. So let's do a 201 and send that purchase order. Let's find the time sent. I need to filter based on the sending order. Okay. So this is basically what happened. Let me highlight this. What happened is that in the buyer's remorse is over, I accidentally, or in this case intentionally for the purposes of this demo, sent the order accepted message twice. And as you can see, the visual representation of my of the process is very different from the previous one. Let's compare that to the previous purchase order. These are the 4 ones, so let's have another purchase order from previously. Remove the. It's fine. Here we go. Here we go. This is how my process, how I expect my process to look inside the message flow. This is sort of the visual footprint or the visual signature of this specific process based on the design. And this is what happens, or one of the options of how it looks when it's flawed, when something goes wrong. So what happens here is that thanks to the visual representation of my system's behavior at runtime, I'm able to easily detect when the interaction is flawed, is not as I expected it to be. Now, this may be an extreme corner case, or it may be a result of some update failure, updated code, or flawed business logic. The scenarios, there are multiple scenarios why this can happen, but the bottom line is that using this type of visual visualization, I can easily detect that and understand that, well, something went wrong inside the BIOS remorse is over activity, because I do not expect four order accepted messages to be consumed. I'm just expecting 2. So let's check that out. Okay, so this more or less concludes the demo. So let's go back to the slides and where's the slides? Here we go. So what we've just seen was the service matrix. We've created the online video store sample, used Service Insight alongside Service Matrix to view my system in both runtime and design time, and fixed various bug scenarios, and also viewed the Saga, the workflow engine, how it behaves internally, in depth, and with all the information incoming, outgoing, and internal visualized. And let's go to Q&A. Brett, you with me?
I am. We've got a number of questions here for you. Let's start with the first. When will Service Matrix support Visual Studio 2013?
Thank you for that question. Soon, very, very soon. Currently, Service Matrix is available for Visual Studio 2012. We're working very, very hard to bring it to you. There's a very soon you're going to have that.
Christian asks, is it possible to use commands from referenced assemblies?
Just go back here. I'm assuming that what is meant is that, for example, in here, in the sender. Give me a sec. The sender is not here. When I send or publish an event, whether this can be performed in another assembly that's not in here. Well, the answer is yes. All you have to do is build that assembly and reference it and call it like any other .NET code. The idea is that the creation of the endpoints through the service matrix allows you to better visualize the actual model that you're trying to create, and well, basically you rein in the chaos of having a really large number of entities and endpoints, messages, etc. that are interacting. Using the canvas allows you to create the boilerplate code, the endpoint, the hosts, and you can use reference assemblies, just call them like any other .NET code from the underlying handlers we've just seen. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, Ramon noticed that you were constantly deploying within Service Matrix and asked if it'd be easier to first design the flow, then publish all in one go.
Yeah, well, basically it's a matter of preference. I was sort of creating components and then deploying them. I could have just created all the components and then I could have deployed them as the last phase in the demo. It's simply a matter of preference. Now, currently we do not have a deploy for all. It still needs to be one component at a time, but it's something we can consider, especially for the larger scenarios. It may be coming. We can consider that as a feature. Currently, there's no absolute requirement for publishing before continuing. You can have it as an undeployed component. The only limitation is that once you build, when you build your solution and you have an undeployed component, it will throw a very descriptive and understandable error message saying basically you have undeployed component, here is its name, please deploy it. But other than that, whichever way you'd like to go about modeling your system.
Baskin asks if you can have multiple canvases in Service Matrix.
We currently have a single canvas per solution. There's no limitation on having multiple, well, you can build as many solutions as you'd like, but currently, as we all know, Visual Studio is also limited to a single solution per Visual Studio instance. So I guess the number would be one canvas per solution at this time. And it would be interesting to think about. I'm not completely sure what the scenario would be to have multiple canvases. It would be interesting. It would be interesting to understand what you had in mind. So either add an additional question in the chat window or contact us offline. It's an interesting scenario.
We have a couple of questions, a couple of attendees that asked the same question. Does Service Matrix support unobtrusive mode?
N-Service Bus supports unobtrusive mode, so the answer is yes.
Can Service Matrix reverse engineer the diagram from an existing N-Service Bus solution?
Excellent question. I love that one. No, it cannot. We cannot reverse engineer existing N-Service Bus solutions. We are, however, investigating the issue of incorporating existing endpoints into the diagram, so that if you, for example, have existing endpoints and they're already deployed, either in a development environment or in a production environment or in a testing environment, we can detect that and add representations of them to the canvas and have them and have the code that you're creating in Service Matrix either subscribe to events sent by those existing endpoints or publish events to those endpoints. So this is something we're investigating. Currently, it is not supported.
This kind of brings up maybe a little bit bigger question that was asked by Pasi, saying that he and his team, they've used N-Service Bus for almost 2 years now. Is there any benefit by starting to use Service Matrix at this time?
Well, it basically depends on the kind of benefit you see in Service Matrix. We're seeing several scenarios. We're seeing scenarios where you have where it can be used to ramp up learning and basically learn a lot faster or develop a lot faster, either proof of concept samples or basically model something from scratch. Regarding the use of Service Matrix with an existing N-Service bus, it basically depends on what you want to gain. I can easily think of one scenario in which Service Matrix will be extremely beneficial. Let's say I have an N-Service bus system with, I don't know, 5 endpoints, and I'd like to create 5 additional endpoints to expand that, basically create another subsystem or another neighboring system that does something new and have those two systems communicate with each other. So I can either create that second subsystem or system manually using N-Service Bus directly, or I can use Service Matrix to do it a lot faster and deploy it alongside the older existing N-Service Bus system. Note, however, that out of the box, when you're using a Service Matrix, you're using the latest N-Service Bus version. As I said previously, when I'm creating the solution, when I'm creating the endpoints, I'm downloading from NuGet the latest version of N-Service Bus. In this case, it's 4.6, which was just released today, along with all the other plugins. So if you'd like to, if you're developing something with Service Matrix, please note the backwards compatibility issues. Like, for example, you can use it with 3.3, if not 3.x, but not earlier than that. So in essence, there are scenarios in which Service Matrix makes sense and has a lot of value when developing alongside an existing solution. I'm not sure whether, I don't think that taking an existing solution and converting it to Service Matrix is an extremely beneficial solution in all cases, simply because if we're talking about just monitoring that existing solution, just seeing how it behaves, what are the interactions, I can just as easily use the various views provided by Service Insight, in this case the message flow view or the Saga view. And one additional thing that may be interesting is another view which I'll address later in a couple of minutes, which I refer to as the sequence view. So all these views that are available in runtime using Service Insight, they do not have any dependency on Service Matrix. You can use them without Service Matrix for existing N-Service Bus solutions using the standard auditing feature. Any N-Service Bus version that supports auditing can be visualized using the message flow, for example, that resides inside of Service Insight. Hopefully that answers that question.
John asks, what about messages being received out of order?
That is a more general question, I guess, that relates to N-Service Bus as a whole. So the behavior in this case would be identical to N-Service Bus. Under the hood, Service Matrix is generates N-Service Bus code, and the configuration, the transport, the behavior that you would expect from N-Service Bus is the same as always. The major difference is the method of development and creation of the code, which makes it a lot faster, a lot easier, and a lot more visually understandable and comprehensible. So all the behavior regarding things like transactions, distributed transactions, out of order messages or in order messages, exactly once delivery, that sort of stuff, as it applies to N-Service Bus, it also applies to Service Matrix.
Okay, Simon asks, is it possible to configure how the boilerplate code is generated to avoid the use of partial classes, for instance?
Well, in this case, partial classes are somewhat of an inherent feature that allows us to add a lot of functionality into the Service Matrix. It will be extremely hard to have Service Matrix work without partial classes. Having said that, let's address the more general question of whether the templates we use to generate the code, whether they are customizable. We're using T4 templates, and they're located on your machine, so technically you can edit them. However, from a support perspective and from the perspective of whether we support that and support those customizations, currently we do not. Note that if you decide to go in and change those templates are not stored. Those templates will be overridden during the next Service Matrix upgrade. If, for example, you go to the Visual Studio extension window and update the Service Matrix to a new version that's been released, then that will override the T4 templates changes which you've done. So it is possible. Currently, it's not supported.
Danny, was there more that you wanted to show today, or do we want to take more questions? So I've got about 45 more questions, so obviously we won't be able to get into all of them today.
Oh, whoa. Okay, so I suggest we'll go about and continue with the presentation and discuss how we're going to address the questions. So let's talk a bit about learning more. So one way of learning more is by basically accessing our developer portal. Here's the link, docs.particular.net. This is how it looks, and it's basically our new developer portal containing a lot of all the documentation and a lot of new documentation, which we're working hard to enhance and add to it. Now, most of you are aware that documentation. Well, the previous documentation site was not so good, the organization was not so good. We've been working very, very hard to make the new documentation guidance site a lot better. Hopefully, we're making progress on that, but please let us know if you encounter any typos, any bugs, any issues in the documentation or guidance. There's a very large improve this document button at the top of each and every article. Please use that to let us know what can be improved in the article or ask for additional information, additional articles. We're eager to have feedback and requests regarding any guidance that you would like to have or any guidance that requires fixing or updating. Regarding training, we also have a list of upcoming events and also the NSBCon event in the NSBCon conference. Britt, would you like to describe that?
Yeah, definitely. So it's an all about and service bus conference. There's two of them this summer, one in London in late June, the other in New York City in late September. So both conferences will be 2 days in length and feature a lot of top speakers like Udi Dahan, Oren Ayeni, Greg Young, and we'll have discussion panels and dive deep into distributed system development, and also hear from customers and how they're using the platform and in Service Bus. So you can go to nsbcon.com for more details on the event in London and also New York City.
Okay. Additional features we're providing is support, various levels of support, starting from free support, community support, or non-critical incident and guidance, and also critical incidents 24/7, etc. So if you require that, please take a look. It's something you can either get for free or purchase. And speaking about purchasing, there's the licensing issue. There's the licensing plan. We have various licensing plans aimed at various requirements, needs. You can see all the details in the licensing page, in particular .NET/licensing. And if you have any questions or concerns regarding this or any other topic, just there's a really big contact us button at the bottom of every page. Just feel free to contact us and ask, and we'll try to answer and make sure that everything makes sense. And I guess this more or less covers the planned content of the webinar. Are there any additional questions you'd like to raise, Britt?
There's a lot of questions. Among them is, hey, why didn't you show any service bolts? Do you want to address that one, Danny?
Yeah, definitely. Why didn't I show any service bolts? Basically, because time does not permit. There's a lot more to show, both for Service Matrix and Service Insight. I just covered I just scratched the surface in this session. And Service Pulse, which is the production monitoring tool, and it's a tool we're extremely excited about, will be covered in depth in an upcoming webinar that will be dedicated to production monitoring, and specifically production monitoring for distributed systems built on top of N-Service Bus, and answering various questions like, what kind of actions do we feel are the best practices in monitoring such tools, and what's basically the difference between monitoring such distributed systems that are developed on top of N-Service Bus, using N-Service Bus? What differentiates them from other services, from other systems? And well, stay tuned. We'll do it soon, and we'll address those questions in depth.
Exactly. So as to all the questions that were asked tonight, we will definitely get to them. So you'll be receiving emails from us with answers to your questions. If you have any additional ones, feel free to contact us about them. You can also find us, of course, on Twitter at nservicebus. And as Denny said, join us next month, and we'll dive deep into production monitoring for distributed solutions. So look for an invitation in your inbox in the next couple of weeks. And I think that's all we have time for today. So on behalf of Danny Cohen, this is Britt King saying goodbye for now, and we'll see you again soon on the next Particular Software live webinar. Thanks, everybody. Bye.